Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Zevachim daf Vav. We are going to begin on Vav Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top. So we learned that when it comes to the din of Tumura, that Tumura can only be done by an individual, and therefore it was questionable exactly how we understand whether or not the Yaresh is actually Kaina the carbon. Because if you have brothers that are Kona the carbon, then how do we understand it when it says that Haniach Behema L'Shnei Bana B'Meis Kriv Ein Mamirin Ba? There's no din Tumura. So it must be, why is there no Tumura? Because they're Yairish. Because they're partners. And therefore the original person who had this animal, who died, he caused his 2 kids to inherit it, and therefore that was a raya that really you're kind of the carbonis. The answer is not necessarily. It's just when it comes to Tumura, even though maybe technically you're not Yarish, but there's a Gzeres HaKosav that we say that it's Ki'ilu, like it's yours, even though it's not really a Yerusha, enough that when it comes to partners, there's no din Tumura. So Maskav Rav Yaakam and Harpakoid. El Miata Gabi Meiser. When it comes to the din of Meiser, Dechsev, the pasuk says, and let's get the whole pasuk. Dim Goel Yigal Ish Masroi. When a person redeems his Meiser, Chamishasav Yosef Alav. So you have to add an extra 5th. So that's what rabbis, that's a Yerush. Even a Yerush is obligated to have to add a 5th. So Hachinami Echad Goyal Ve'ein Shnaim Goalim. So a Yerush should say the same thing, that only one person can redeem it and not 2. Says Rashi, Shemoisav Chaimish Upoides Meiser Aviv. So Gemara answers, Shani Meiser de Gabi Avuhoi Nami Isa B'Shutvas. So he said that when it comes to the din of Meiser, it Isa B'Shutvas. Says Rashi, Dol Ashachan Dimamayit Shutvin Mepidyan Meiser Sheni. We don't find to exclude Shutvin from redeeming Meiser Sheni. U'Tamura Hainu Tamim Mishim Dechol HaParsha Nemro B'Lashin Yachid, as we said in yesterday's daf, which is why we said that there's no din Tamura when the partner, when these brothers who are like partners inherit it, but not necessarily doesn't mean that it's a Yerusha. Rav Ashi, Umina. And from here we should say like this: that a Yerush is kinda the carbon from the person who died. So Hainu dechad miyamemer. That's at least one Yerush should be able to do Tumura. El Iyamrid lo kanyohu, if there's no kinyan at all, heichi mamer, how could Tumur be done? V'yamar Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Yochanan ha makdish, one who is makdish an animal, moisav chaimish. First of all, you add a 5th, but here's the key point: u'mischaper oisa Tumura. So the Yerush, the Yerushim should be able to make a Tumura. That's what it says: mischaper oisa Tumura. V'atayirim, and one who separates mishaloi. Al shaloi chaver tovasana shaloi. So again, the key line is the mischaper oisa Tumurasai. So apparently we see from here that they should in fact be able to do this. So the answer is like this: Mikiboy lo michbara mikufia mechapra. So it's not mikibia, they're not mechapra, but rather mikufia, like a floating atonement, which is why they can also do Tumura, because it's not considered to be like a typical atonement. It's like considered makufia, like a floating one. Says Rashi, Kapara Kavua Shi Yarish Bala Mamish Enohen. To say that they inherit like a Yerusha, no, that we're not going to say. Hilka Gabi Mincha, like we said before, now Mincha it says Nefesh, so it has to be an individual. So Shera Li Karev Delot Deshutvanhi, because they're not considered to be partners. Because if they were partners, then you couldn't bring a mincha. Mincha can only be by a yachid. So therefore, that shows that they're not yorshim, that it's still linked to the original person. Of a kapara kufra, but they do get a floating atonement. But safa mamel yesh yeshel hen boy v'hilkach mamir. Since they get some type of kapara, so therefore it's something enough that they could at least do tamura, because even though they're not a Yerusha, but that floating element that they can also get a kapara for bringing it is enough to be able to say that they can do a tamura. Says question 8. Amru Gabi Yarish Gamboilo Machaber Makufi Makafra. What's the nafkamina basically? So he says to say that it's not machaper. That's the reason why if the person leaves a mincha to 2 children and the guy dies, you can be makrabit, and it's not possible because of shuttus, because it's considered the father's mincha and it's not a yerusha. However, when it's floating, lafikach yarish mamir. That's the reason why he can do tamura. Okay. All right, let's continue. So now iboyhu. The Gemara asks a different question. Kifru al mashibo or lo kifru. So the question is that we've been saying up until now, when it comes to kodshim, as Rashi says, shenisbachu shlo shma, that wasn't brought with the right intention, and you're a makrabit. So our Mishnah said lo ol l'shem chayva, that it doesn't go up as your chayiv, and therefore v'tzarech l'haviacher, you have to bring another animal. So we already know that. But what's the question? Says Rashi, im kafar al hachet shehufreshu alav. Does he still get a kapara for the chet in which it was expressed? V'nafkamina shel yidag min ha'yisurin beinetayim. So he does have to bring a second carbon anyway. So what's the difference? Because he at least will hope that he's not going to get yisurim in the meanwhile, because that first carbon at least protects him, if you will. Or is it that it just bring it, but it doesn't really accomplish anything, and therefore you could potentially be concerned of yisurim? So on this, the Gemara says, "Omer Rav Sheshes b'Rei Rav Idi v'star b'dolo kifru." Probably it doesn't do anything, and therefore it's not going to protect you from yisurin in the meanwhile. Because if it does something, so the sheni lama huba, then what's the whole purpose of bringing it a second time anyway? If it protects you and it obviously accomplishes something, so then what's the whole point of bringing the second one? The fact that the second one has to be brought, that demonstrates that the first one is nothing. Okay, so if it's nothing, kifru karv. So what's the purpose? Rav Shish, which we had a little bit, we talked about this yesterday. Rav Shish b'Rei Rav Idi hachik kakasha. This is kifru. If you want to tell me it does nothing, it's you still have to bring it because it was coming mekayach l'shma, even though you was shlo l'shma. However, your initial intention was l'shma, like you designated this carbon. V'shani lomahu ba l'chaper, and then we discussed so why whether it's mechaper. El iyam kifru sheni lomahu ba. Tzugan Rashi. Iyam bishar malu kifru afil hachimi karvi stuff to be makravit. Dishaloi l'shma mikal l'shma kasi. Even though he was shlo l'shma, but it was originally for the right reasons. Dimitchilaso was shmo hukdash. Let's say you wanted to bring an ola, so originally it was an ola. The problem is that when you actually started doing the avoda, you had the wrong machshava. That was not an ola. You thought it was going to be a shlomim or something. So we say that because at least your original intention was good, so therefore you have to still bring this animal. Mechaperes al asay o im ashamhu yechaper al ashamoy, and therefore maybe it actually could have accomplished something. That was the whole question. So iboyhu. Actually, let's go to question 9. Question 9. Kodshim shenizbechu shloshma iboyhu ikifru al hachet. So man nifshat ume'ez svara. So he said that it doesn't do anything, because if it does something, then what's the purpose of bringing the second one? Okay. Iboilhu. So now we ask a different question. So let's say you did something, like an aseh, you violated something after you already were mafreshing. Because when it comes to an ola, the din is that an ola is mechaper for an aseh, a violation of an aseh or lavanetak aseh. So, and that could even be more than one violation. You can bring an ola. The question is, if you already mafresh, now typically you made a mistake and you're like, I better bring a carbon, so you mafresh the carbon. Now, what happens instead? After you've just been mafresh the carbon, you do another thing wrong. For example, so does that carbon that you already designated, will that also work for the avera that you did afterwards? Maybe it's like a carbon chatas. Ma chatas dekayim hafrasha inolach hafrasha loy. When it comes to a chatas, if you violated something which would be a chiv karis b'mezid and b'shogeg, you did it, it's a chiv carbon chatas. Now the requirement of having to bring that kiss or a seira for a carbon chatas, for a carbon yachid, is only after you already did the sin. Now, as you did the thing wrong, then you were mafresh it. Therefore, if you were mafresh and then you did a sin, it doesn't work. So maybe avhacha nami dekayim hafrasha in leachar hafrasha lo. Maybe we'll say the same thing by an osham that doesn't work, by an oyula that doesn't work. O dilma lo dami el chatas. The chatas al kol ched v'ched boy al yasui chad chatas. Every single sin that you do wrong, you have to bring a separate carbon, right? You have to bring a separate carbon for every single violation, right? However, when it comes to an oil of a hachikivan, the ika kama asay gabe mechapra as the lachar hafrashanami mechapra. However, when it comes to this, it works for numerous sins together. So Tashma, the pasuk says a samach, and the pasuk also says v'nirtze. You do smicha on the animal, you press your kayach onto the animal, and then it's accepted. The v'chi smicha mechaperes. Understand, the smicha is what's nirtze. We know v'lein kapar el b'dam. Shnever ki adamu b'nefesh. We know it's only the dam is yechaper. So what does this pasuk mean? It means the following. This is a little bit of a cryptic line, but we're going to have to get through it. It means like this: Shim es asas l'smicha shirei mitzvah. Now, smicha is really considered like secondary. It's the shiri mitzvah. Mal v'kasav ki'ilu kiper v'chiper. Let's say a person violated by not doing the smicha. It's ki'ilu like he wasn't mechaper, but he still gets atonement. Now, my lav, what does that mean? The chiper, he gets an atonement for what he did wrong. Say the koidem hafrasha, right? And lo kiper, when it says he doesn't get kapara, is that say the smicha, dahabi the liachar hafrasha. He made a mistake by not doing smicha, so that violation will not work for the carbon. So therefore, what do we see? Why doesn't the fact you violated not doing smicha, why doesn't it work? It's a raya, apparently, that because it was done after hafrasha, it doesn't work. So that's the answer. The answer is no, not necessarily. This, you can't learn out from the mistake of not doing smicha. Why not? So let's get this down again. My lab the chiper asay the kainim hafrasha, lu chiper asay the smicha the havile asay hafrasha. So my answer is Omer Rabban asay the smicha karmet. You're trying to tell me about smicha? No, you can't learn out from there. Shani chosam is different over there. Hakol dechol kama doli shachat. As long as you didn't do the shchita, so you do the smicha, then you do the shchita. As long as you didn't do the shchita, balmad v'samach koi, amos, you could always still do the smicha. You can always lean on the animal. So as long as you haven't done shchita yet, you still have that window of opportunity to do smicha. However, ba'omid b'samach koi, amos kohavi asay. So when did you violate smicha? It's only achar shchita. Because once you shechted it, and you can't do smicha on a dead animal. So liachar shchita loy kama boilan. That's not a question. Obviously, if you already shechted the animal, there's no way an avera after the shchita of the animal that will not cover that mistake. The question is, if the sin was after hafrasha before the shchita, whether it works, and that we don't necessarily know. Question TA16. Question TA16, which of course I got wrong. Iboiluhu, fine. Iboiluhu, asa the leachar hafrasha mechaper lo mechapra. Mavur b'gemara the alasei the smicha lo meboilun. So madua, why is that not a question? Again, because you can do smicha as long as you want, right? As long as you didn't do shchita yet. Once you've done shchita, so it's considered to be an avera only after the shchita, and no one's going to hold that that's going to work. Okay. So that's not a rise. Amuli Rav Huna Bar Yehuda Rava Ema Chiper Gavra. Why don't we say that even after the hafrasha, it's also mechaper because of Kiper Gavra. So what does that mean? Says Rashi, Al koil asay shibiyadai ben nitzel min yisurin. That when it comes to the person, he's saved from yisurin. So therefore, even after he's violated, he did an asay, so it will still protect him when he's makravit to protect him from yisurim. So therefore, the fact is that obviously shows that it does accomplish something as we continue Vavam and Beis. So our answer is lo chiper kamei shmaya. Says Rashi, when nachas ruach l'kainai, it just means that there's nachas ruach to Hashem. D'loi avad mitzvah min amuvchar, but you didn't do the mitzvah in the most proper way. Okay, so milo tanan. After all, do we not learn b'hanoiser b'shemen asher al kaf v'goymer? So this apparently is a pasuk. Let's get the pasuk regarding the oil that's put on the head of a Mitzayra. It says like this: "V'hanoiser Hashem b'shemen," the extra oil asher al kaf hakoyin that's on his fingers, on his hands. Yitin al rosh hametaher. He should wipe this oil on the Mitzayra's head. V'chipro of a koyin lifnei Hashem, and then he achieves kapara. Now, how do we understand this pasuk? Now, it says, "Im nosan, if im nosan kiper, v'im lo nosan lo kiper de Rabbi Kiva." Apparently, it's saying that it's like ma'akev, that you actually have to put the leftover oil onto the Mitzayra's head in order for him to achieve kapara. Rav Yochanan ben Nuri Omer shiri mitzvahein bein nitan bein shlo nitan kiper. It's not necessary. It's a nice thing to do, but if you didn't do it, he'll still achieve kapara, even if the oil was not put on the head of the Mitzayra. It's ke'ilu like you don't get kapara. So again, namely that like you maybe deliberately didn't do it. So again, my ke'ilu kiper ilema dimiboilia suye carbon achrina. Maybe it means that you have to bring another carbon because it wasn't done. Amrid bein nasan bein lo nasan kiper. It says that even if you didn't do it, you don't need to bring another carbon. El kippur gavra. The person gets a kapara. However, when it says lo kippur, it just means kamei shemaya, because it wasn't really the proper way. Hachinami kippur b'chulu. So therefore, in this situation, also it's not necessarily a raya to teach us when it comes, just like by the case of the Mitzayra, so too in our situation. This person who did the smicha and then he didn't do the smicha, right? So it's possible that he got some kapara, but it wasn't acceptable by Hashem. Let's look at question 10. Also, smicha shiri mitzvah malav kasav ki'ilu chiper v'chiper malo chiper afal pi kiper. What do you mean there was no kapara? So one answer is what we said. In other words, he didn't do the smicha, which is the asay. That's the mistake. Or what does it mean? Dul chiper means it's not kippur in front of Hashem. Dul aben mitzvah min mocher. You just didn't do the mitzvah in the most proper way, which is what it means also over here. That really the kohen is supposed to put the oil on his head, but the fact that he didn't, that's not going to be ma'akev, if you will. Hasam nami chiper. Hasam nami. Also over there, keeper matan b'hoinois, low keeper matnos haroish. What happened? He did oil on the thumbs of the Mitzayra, but not on his head. Right? That's what he did. So he didn't put it on the head, and since he didn't do this part, so therefore he misses out on that element. Kamei Shemaya. Tashma Rav Shimon Omer Kivsei Atzeres. So when it comes to Shavuos, there is a requirement of bringing Shnei Kvosim, and the question is Lomahin Boyim. And it's together with the Shtei Alechem, the two wheat breads. So why do we bring these kivsei atzeres? What does it accomplish? So this is brought down in Masechet Shavuos. Kivsei atzeres shlomim dinhu. After all, it's considered to be a carbon shlomim. So says Rashi, "V'heichetana seved milsa al tumas mikdash v'kedashav." Right. So we're going to say that it achieves kapara for someone who enters in the mikdash tamei or ate that which was tamei, and as the Gemara in Shavuos talks about whether there's yediyah b'chila, v'soif, etc. Lechem hein boyin lahateres hachadash. So the question is, it was really brought for the sake of matering new grains into the mikdash regarding the menachos, the flour offering, as well as the first fruits. So Ella Seiri Atzeres, the he-goat, Lomahin Boyin. What was the purpose of that? Because again, it was a shlomim. So what is the purpose of the he-goat that's brought on Shavuos? So Al Tumas Mikdash Kedashav. That was brought for the Tumas Mikdash Kedashav, because that wasn't considered to be like a shlomim, as opposed to the Shnei Seirim. And therefore, again, the Shnei Seirim accomplished something else. However, again, it was brought down beginning of Masechet Shavuos, the Seiri Haragolim come for Tumas Mikdash Kedashav, She'ein Bo Yediyah Lo B'Dechil Lo B'Soif. If there was no yediyah at the beginning, before, or at the beginning or at the end, okay. Tumas Mikdash Kedashav, fine. Nizrak Damo Shel Rishain, so Sheni Lamakarav. Understand, what is the purpose of bringing two animals if you already brought one and you achieved Tumas Kapara for Tumas Kodesh Mikdashav? So then what's the purpose of bringing the second one? The answer is Tuma Shehoira Ben Zelazeh. What happens that in between the bringing of these sacrifices, you did another Aveira. So therefore, you achieve Kapara only afterwards. Now, obviously, this becomes a problem. So Amar Miyata Ruin Ha Yisrael Hakev Kamanasayan B'chol Ace B'chol Shah. The truth is, the Yidden are able to bring these karbonos anytime. Says Rashi, the Chol Shah B'safek Chatoim Kaimi. Because the reality is, it's any possible time that someone could have done this violation. So therefore, it could always be brought. But rather we looked away, the Pasuk Torah looked away from our sins. What happened over here? We're saying that we were mafresh these two seirim already, yet it's machaper on the sins even after the first one. So you bring the first one, so if anyone makes a mistake in between, so then the second one works. Well, that is a raya, because if you were mafresh them both, and then the Vera came about, so that demonstrates that it works even after hafrasha. So you finally got our answer. Wait just 1 second. If you were right that we're mafresh both the animals simultaneously, then that would be a good point. So what happens is we have two animals, we're mafresh one, and we're makrivit. And then afterwards, we're mafresh the second one, and then we're makrivit. And therefore, it's not a raya. It's possible that in between, the second one we haven't done hafrasha yet. So why don't we therefore basically say that that's dafka what the pasuk is talking about, that was done in this peculiar manner, b'zar chazeh? After all, it's certainly not mentioned in the pasuk like that. And my papa karbanos sibur ka'amrit shani karbanos sibur delay based in kamasnaland. So this is actually a different approach. We've had this in other places in Shas, that based in makes conditions. And therefore, says Rashi, even if you're mafresh both animals at the same time, so you can say, so it's a raya that if a nevera happens afterwards, that after hafrasha it still works. No, lote hafrasha acharon hafrasha ad somach lahakravasai. What we do is we consider through a Tanai based in that the second one does not actually kick in until right before you're makriv. Why? In order for it to cover any mistakes that happen in the middle. So therefore, even though you're right, we probably did designate both of them, but it was a takanas chachamim. We were made a condition or a masna that the din will be that the second one will not be mafresh. It's not considered to have like a din of hafrasha. An order may be pumfakert because it doesn't work if it was done afterwards. The sin was done after the hafrasha. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, the Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Karbanos Sibor. When it comes to Karbanos Sibor, Sakin Moishchasan Lama Shehain. So when it comes to its knife, it draws to what it is to be. So what does that mean? So if we look in Rashi says Kagayin Tamidin. Let's say you have a carbon tamid, Shul Hutzrachu Tzibor, Shenichu Matruma Yashana, and this actually, as discussed over there, there are apparently always going to be leftover animals, so you have to have animals left over, you have to have extra animals, extra timidin. So what happens, because you can't use from before Nisan, from the end of Adar, and use those animals from the beginning of Nisan, it has to come from a Truma Chadasha. So mitzvah heavy min chadash, as the Gemara says Rosh Hashanah, but it's in Shkolim also. Shtaich the miksherim lekeitzim mizbech. So he's saying that you can take those to meet him as oilos. And says Rashi, Kishmagia echad b'nisan shemekaitzin lo as mizbech. The question is, how does that work? How is it considered to be b'shem oila? And the answer is, the basin was masna, and that's how it works. And the same thing over here. So Amalei Rav Yosef, Rav Shmuel, Rav Papa, Mi'isle Rav Shimon lay based in Masnalehin. So it's only going to work if we hold that that's what he holds. However, we know he doesn't hold like that. Rav Yidi Barav and Rav Amram, Rav Yitzchak, Rav Yochanan, Tamidim Shul Chutzochat Tzibor, as I said, and again this is brought over there, that when it comes to a carbon tamid, because there's extra animals that need to be designated, we have extras. So then, what do you do with those extra animals? Those couple tamidim on the first day of Nisan, because they came from the before. So Shul Chutzochat Tzibor, they're not able to be used anymore. So as we continue to Zayin and Aleph, L'divrei Rav Shimon ein niftin tamimim. They cannot be poida as a tamim, says Rashi. The hachi gomer law Rav Yochanan, Rav the pligi Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon lay based in Masna. He doesn't actually hold of this, that the basin has this precondition regarding these carbonis, lakshirin latimidi shan haba, that they are able to be brought. You can bring this carbon tamid, these two animals that were designated from the year before. If you need them, you need them. V'im la, but if they're extra and you don't need them, you kedoshim l'dameim. So you have to be makdish their value. Sheyivtu oisin memois chulin below mum. So you be pointed. You can, according to one opinion, you're pointed without a mum. V'yotzim l'chayil. V'yipadameim l'moiser truma. V'achar kach yisur v'yichu oisam b'truma chadasha. Then you can take from the new amount. V'yuchshul l'tamidim. V'divrei chachamim niftin tamimim. According to the chachamim, he says you could be pointed even as a tamim. Why? Del East lay based in Masnaland, because they do hold there's a condition. Alma Leis Rav Shimon lay based in Masnaland. So we see clearly that he doesn't hold like that. So furthermore, says the Gemara, Haboy mini Rav Yomi Rav Zera Siri at Saras. When it comes to the Sirium on Shavuos, Shekibul Daman B'shnei Kaisais, they're accepted the blood in two different vessels. Menizrak Damo Shel Rishon, and you sprinkle the first one, so Sheni Lama Hu Ba. So what's the purpose of the second one? The answer is Al Tuma Shehoira Bein Zrika Shel Zelazeh, because at least after the Zrika, so nonetheless it'll work between that. Now over here, obviously that's after Hafrasha. Let's just see the parentheses. Nizrak Damo Shel Sheni Lama Hu Gakiman. So Adkan Lama Boyle El Say the Leachar Shchita. The whole question is, after the shechita, but between the zrikas, how does it work? So that is questionable. However, certainly it sounds like after hafrasha, it certainly does work. That if you did a sin after hafrasha, it should still work. I mean, this is Dilma imtim saloy mekaymer. Maybe it's not necessarily a good answer, but it's just saying that imtim saloymer, that you could do the after the hafrasha, you did not say that the oil will still work for that one. So if you hold that's the case, what happens if the you have the dam in both kalim, and the question is, what is the din then? Do we also say that if you did never after zrika of number one, that it covers for at that as well? Says Rashi, Mishnei Kaisais Nishchatin ke'echad vein shayis l'arui tuma bin shchita sehen. There was no time because they were shechted basically at the same time. But nizruk damasharisha. But there was some time between the first sprinkling and the second. Sheni lama karav Rav Shimon. Why would he require you to be mark of the second? Hari in tuma bin zelazeh. Right. So again, it's just telling us it's not necessarily a raya. It's just telling you that if you hold that you could do it, if you did not say after the hafrasha that it works, what would be the din in this case? Okay, we're gonna stop there. Let's look at question 11, maybe the first part of it. Siri haragolim haboyim al tumas mikdash v'kedashim ketzad hasheni karav al tuma shira ben zelazeh inemi de in kapara laseh liachar hafrasha. If you say there's no kapara on that, so one answer is lay based in masnalehem shalot hafrasha so hafrasha ad samach hakravasai. So this sin, it's like it happened before the hafrasha, right? That's what we said. Or nidchaik v'noiki kra demesi sheni davka kishafrishin zachazeh v'sheni karav al tuma shira ben zrika hafrasha. Okay, all right. And maybe we'll see that you can look in this Rashi over here. Dilma tervayu kimeboyle bein zelos dedikam Rav Shimon kaidem hafrasha koi oli achar hafrasha koi dimtim solemer achar hafrasha nami koi. That also works. Kodem shchita o afil la'achar shchita ad zrika. Afil ad zrika v'dilma loy kamelin krev zera v'lifshete ba'en. This question was not answered. Okay, a lot of questions there on a lot of Dirshu questions. Let's see, maybe a TA. What was that? We did TA 16, TA 17. No, TB 18. The Maskanas Gemara Rabbi Yarish. This is well back. That's floating, right? So mehechin harayid in mechaper bekivya. So we said, okay, we had this already. That we learned this out from, and let's just see. I had this question. And that's question 8. So let me just mark that down. TB 18. So first of all, we learned out from menachos, because it has to be nefesh, only a yachid. So the fact that it can be brought, that shows that it doesn't. That shows that it doesn't work. You're not yarish, right? So first of all, we learn from there. Let's see. Okay, got that completely wrong also. Oh, no, I didn't. I'm crossing it out. I'm wrong. Yemaisin Tamura, Begama Indian Yerushas Aviv, Shiyachol, Lavi Carbon, Shalom. Okay, so the other answer is Legabe. That's not totally wrong. Legabe Menachais, right? Lodin Yerusha. Okay, because a Menachais. Nefesh, it says the word nefesh ksiv, right? Dafke biyachid. So therefore, it's a raya. It's not Yerusha, because if it was Yerusha, then it wouldn't work. Okay. Mi she'einu mechuyev klum psula. Okay, ad kan.